So there's two ways to fill a cup with a child for their attention needs. There's the way where you just kind of splash water in over and over throughout the day. And as time goes on, some of that gets drained out and you just, always splashing a little bit of water. There's another way, which is way more effective. It's just you put the cup under the tap, you open it all the way up for a much shorter period of time. Your kids would much rather have all of your attention some of the time than some of your attention all the time. So just do that.
It's a brand new day. Hey. Wake up every morning and say, it's a brand new day. Hey. Take a good day, make it great. Okay.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Whole Parent Podcast. My name is John, aka Whole Parent on social media. Wherever you go to consume your short form video content, whether that's TikTok, Instagram, even Facebook, although I'm not super active over there, I still cross-post my stuff over there. And of course, the guy who makes the Whole Parent Podcast. And on this episode, we're going to just jump right in. We're talking about new babies. So how do we bring a new baby home? How do we bring them into a family and an established family? I want to specify when we're talking about new babies today, they're in the context of sibling relationships or sibling dynamics. And so we're not just talking about like, okay, the first 3 days that you have or the first 3 months that you have a new baby at home and it's your first child, although that would be a great podcast episode if people have questions about that. Just doesn't tend to be the people who know me from social media because I tend to talk about older kids. That would be a great podcast episode. I'm sure that we could find amazing things to talk about. But in these 3 questions, these are new baby questions for parents who they already have a child. There might be an age, a toddler and a newborn, or even a grade schooler and a newborn. And they have questions related to that. And so we have 3 questions from real parents. The first one comes from Parker. And before I answer this question, I always forget to say in the middle, at the very top of the podcast, that if you have not yet done so, I know that we had a ton of people do this right away, but we have not had a lot of people doing this more recently, and we need to keep this trend going. If you have not done so yet, go into whatever podcast app you're listening to this, whether that's Spotify, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, if you watch this on YouTube, and if you have an opportunity to rate this show, go ahead and give me 5 stars. I'd really, really appreciate it. If not, that's okay. I would just love to hear your feedback anyway. And then, do that as well. Give me some feedback. So go in if there's a place where you can write a written review of, hey, what are you learning from this podcast? Do you have multiple kids? Do you have one kid? What are your takeaways from the things that we've talked about thus far? If you can do that, if you can go into your podcast app and actually go and physically do that, even if you have to stop this episode, if you've been kicking yourself because you've listened to other episodes and you've heard me say this before, but you haven't done it yet, just pause right now. Go into that app and do it. And the reason that I need you to do that is because the number one way that I get out, that I am spread to other people, other parents who might be looking for a podcast to help them to raise resilient kids with confidence, those parents, the way that they find me is through the podcast's own pushing me out. So when somebody searches parenting, they might not see my podcast. If they search my name, Whole Parent, they probably will. But if they just search parenting or parenting advice or parenting how-to or whatever like that, the way that Apple or Spotify or Google knows to give them this result as, hey, this is a podcast that is going to help you parent better, is by your reviews and your ratings and by continuing to tune in, engage, listen to these episodes. That's how they're going to know. Downloads, all that stuff. So if you haven't done that yet, I am going to get to this episode. I promise this is not like just going to be an ad the whole time. I am going to get to the episode, but if you have not done that yet, please pause right now, go in and go ahead and do that because you have no idea how helpful that will be to me. And that will allow me to keep doing this. I should say that too. I can't continue to make content on any of my social platforms if it's not landing and if it's not being engaged with. It's not a valuable use of my time or resources. It's certainly not valuable to you if you're not engaging with it and connecting with it and learning from it. And so this lets me know, hey, you should keep making this podcast, which I love doing, by the way. So I really want you to do this. Maybe I'll do it anyway because I just love doing it. Okay, so our first question comes from Parker. Parker is someone who is part of the Whole Parent membership. And he has a 5-year-old. And so this question actually came up in the membership. So Parker, you've already heard this, but I'm more than happy to answer this question because the reason I brought it in here, of course, with Parker's permission, is because this question I feel like is so important, so good. So Parker says, I have a 5-year-old. We're about to be welcoming a new baby to our family, looking for any tips and advice on how to do that during the first couple of months when we're getting acclimated to our new boy. Amazing question, Parker. And the first piece of advice that I have is that we are going to have to embrace a certain level of suck. And what I mean by that is that when we bring a new child into our home, whether that's the second sibling, the third sibling, even the fourth sibling, there is a level where it's just not going to be perfect. It's not going to go, everything is not going to go as according to plans as you expect it to. You have a 5-year-old right now. That means that you have been a parent for 5 years. For 5 years, you've been figuring out how to raise one kid. And my guess is, Parker, you're pretty stinking good at it at this point. The problem is now you're going to be parenting in a completely different way. Your attention's going to be divided. Obviously, your partner, I shouldn't say obviously, in this case, your partner is still going to be recovering from childbirth. And so you're not going to, immediately have as much help as you normally have. You're not going to have as much help ever again because you're going to have a 5-year-old and a new baby now. So it's not just one. So instead of it being 2-on-1, it's going to be 2-on-2, and it's just going to be a little bit more challenging in that way. And so you're going to have to embrace a level of imperfection and mistakes and exhaustion that comes with that initial stage. And I think a lot of our issues when we bring home a new child is actually not even related to the new baby. Although I'll get to that in a second. That fear, when am I going to love my new baby as much as I love my current child? I'll get to that fear in a second. But many of our issues come from the fact that all of a sudden parents who care so much about parenting, and I imagine if you're listening to this right now, whether you're welcoming a new baby to your family or not, you probably care a whole lot about parenting to be listening to a parenting podcast. And so those of us who care so deeply and so profoundly about raising our kids well, we have to give ourselves so much more grace, give ourselves so much more forgiveness and compassion and understanding, because the new child coming into the home is going to mean that the way in which we engage our older kids is going to be different, at least temporarily. And so embrace that madness, try and take it slow. Babies grow really, really fast. I know that people have said that, about kids of all ages. Your kids grow up too fast, but especially newborns, they grow really, really fast. It will not be like this forever. Even the first 3 months will be very different than months 3 through 6. And so give yourself so much grace in that process. If you have to watch a couple episodes of Bluey or whatever when you don't normally, if there's just, a little bit more whining or complaining, if you forget, somebody eats chicken nuggets, or if your 5-year-old eats chicken nuggets every single meal from now until, 2 weeks from now, that's all okay. It's all going to be okay. It is hard to welcome a new baby. And so my first piece of advice is that you have to embrace that. The second piece of advice that I have is that in the spirit of having two parents, or in this case, I'm just going to say, because in Parker's case, he has a 5-year-old and a newborn. But even if you have, let's say 3 kids, 4 kids, one parent, and this is just kind of a piece of advice that I've taken on because this was what worked for us. And so don't hear this as like, there's no evidence to support this necessarily, but I think it works really well. One parent identify, usually it's the mother because of the biological factors. She's still recovering from childbirth if it's a biological child that's being born into the family. Also, if you're breastfeeding, the mother is just a little bit more hands-on with the baby usually than the dad. That's just a natural part of life. Not to say that dads can't do things like skin to skin and holding for naps and all that other stuff, but mom is going to be a little bit more necessary, especially in those early days, than dad. And so, how do we support mom? That's a big question. But in this, for the older kids, one of the best things that we can do is we can say, hey, I understand that my partner, in this case, my wife, is not going to be able to be as present, as one-on-one, as engaged with my 5-year-old. And so I'm going to take on that responsibility of being a little bit extra for those older kids. And it's not to say that you're going to ignore or neglect or not get that cuddle time with baby. It's just to say, you got to kind of take accountability and say, hey, or take responsibility, I should say. That's the right word. Take responsibility for those older kids and say, hey, I'm going to, take them out for a dad date or whatever. We're going to go out. We're going to go hit the town. We're going to go bowling or whatever. And those special one-on-one times that you can build in with your existing child, the child who's already here. I say existing child. What a weird way to say that. With your older child, with your existing child, with your older child, those times you can actually, it can often become, even though it's a disconcerting time for the child for sure, because there's this new sibling in the house and it's exciting, but it's also a little bit anxiety producing, and you're not getting as much time with mom as you might like. Those actually can become amazing memories because those can be the times when dad really showed up and showed out. So, and it doesn't have to be dad, it can be mom. If it's like, what, I really need some time, one-on-one time with my 5-year-old, 2 weeks in, I feel decently recovered. Obviously that process is a years long process to recovering from childbirth, but I feel decently recovered and I want to go and do that. Dad, then be the person who shows up and is going to be all hands on deck for newborn. Don't get me wrong. But in this case, right, for the majority of the time, likely just because of the biological factors at play, you being able to show up in a huge way for that child who's older, they can look back and go, oh man, that was a really exciting time when my little baby sibling was born. I got to do all this fun stuff with dad. And that's building really, really amazing positive association between the, bringing on of, and this is balancing out that, right? Because we're going to embrace the suck, right? We're going to realize that it's not going to always be perfect. We're going to give ourselves a lot of grace. We're going to give ourselves a lot of forgiveness. We're going to learn how to repair well, right? Like all that stuff. That's on one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is we're going to really balance that out with a lot of positive experiences surrounding the new child who's coming into the home. And so by doing that, not only do we balance that out, we also create positive association between this new baby coming into the home and, not losing attention, which is always the fear. Or am I going to start neglecting my child? No, absolutely not. You're not going to neglect your older child. They are going to have to learn a certain measure of patience. And you know what? That's going to be really good for them in the process. They're going to have to learn a certain level of independence that they perhaps didn't have before. You know what? That's going to be really good for them long term. So those are my first 2 tips. And I want to hit one more here before I move on, because I know that I'm spending a long time on Parker's question, but I think, if you're just, when you give me a question like open-ended tips, I'm going to take it and run with it, because I can kind of highlight a lot of the things that I've talked with so many different parents throughout the years of welcoming. This is one of the most common things that comes up, whether that's in a group coaching environment with me or a workshop that I'm doing, or even, just interpersonally, family members who are welcoming a new child. This is one of the first things that people say, hey, how do I do this well? So I have another really good tip here, but yeah, I'm spending a little longer on my first question than I normally do. And the reason for that is because I really do think this is really critically important. And it kind of, I'm going to cover a lot of things here that then will apply to the next 2. And so my last tip, and this is a really, really big one, and so I'm going to sit here for a minute, is that you cannot force the relationship between the older child and the younger child. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that you literally cannot force them to engage in any way. If you do that, if you start forcing it, then what's going to happen is you're going to create additional issues that are just unnecessary. So just don't force it. If you bring home your child and your 5-year-old has no interest in engaging with the new baby, which by the way, absolutely happens, don't force it. If your 5-year-old comes to you and says something that feels really off color or really problematic, like, oh, I wish that my sibling had never been born, or I wish that they would just go away, or I wish that we could give them back, don't balk at that. Be understanding and accepting of that. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit here with some of these other questions, but don't try and force the relationship of, hey, you need to hold your little sibling. We need to get a bunch of pictures. I understand. My wife's a newborn photographer. I understand the desire to get the pictures with the older siblings and the younger sibling together. But, bring that to try and do that in as short amount of time as possible. Don't be constantly trying to, at every turn. I know the impulse to want to do that at all times, but don't do that. And just be willing to approach the relationship on the terms of the older child. be willing to approach the relationship in the terms of the older child. I have a kind of a personal anecdote about this, and that's that when my second child was born, so when my oldest went from being an only child to an older brother, he was about 3.5, or maybe even 4, but almost 4, I mean. But he acted much more like a 4-year-old or a 4.5-year-old. He's always had some places where he really excels and other places where he doesn't. And so in one way, it's his intellectual capacity has always been a little bit advanced. And so intellectually, he was like a 4 or 4.5-year-old, the types of conversations we could have. But emotionally, he was still a 3-year-old, right? And that's just developmental. That's just what happens. That's just how his brain was growing. And so we bring home his little sibling. And I kid you not, I felt like for the first 6 months of his little brother, I mean, like the day his little brother came home or was home, he was born at home. The day that his little brother appeared that next morning for my oldest, that was an exciting day. Sure, we talked about baby Oliver and we did that whole thing. But then very shortly after that, we were on to ignoring him. And I swear he ignored him for months, 6 months almost. And I think a lot of people would have taken that and been like, oh man, that's really problematic. We should, we got to do something about that. But we really went in this aspect of our parenting child-led, and we just allowed him to allow this relationship to foster on his own terms. And by doing that, he didn't feel threatened that he had to incorporate his little brother into our family, that he still had his mom and dad. And it was a much more gradual transition. And in that gradual transition, what actually wound up happening was that he developed a really positive relationship with his little brother. And so they didn't have a lot of the sibling rivalry stuff. I mean, they absolutely do have that to this day, right? Like all kids experience conflict. These kids have to live in the same house, right? They know each other's triggers. They are overlapping at all times. The conflict happens, absolutely. That's an episode for siblings later. But a lot of the negative things that we have identified, those didn't happen with them. And that's just because we were really, really intentional right off the bat to not force the relationship, to allow the relationship to develop on his own terms. And so we allowed him to be the one driving. And by doing that, by having him be the one driving, it fostered all sorts of really, really positive association and felt much less threatening, much less anxiety producing for him because we weren't forcing him into this relationship. And so those are my 3 tips. I'm going to try to run them back really, really quickly just to summarize. Number 1 tip is embrace that this is going to be a challenging time, that it's not going to be perfect. It's going to suck to a certain extent. You're not going to have as much sleep as you want. You're not going to, eat healthy food. You're probably going to, get DoorDash or Grubhub or whatever, 4 times a week. Maybe that's not what you like to do. You might not be eating the way you want to. You might not be going to the gym as much as you want to. Absolutely still practice all of the self-care that you can. But this is not the most happy, starry-eyed time of life for most of us, the first several months of a child. It is just challenging. That's why we call it the 4th trimester. It's like being pregnant, but you have a child on the outside, right? It's not an easy time. Embrace that and give yourself so much grace. Forgive yourself for your shortcomings, especially with your older child. Number 2, do the best that you can to positively associate this by giving your child extra attention as the off parent, the parent who's not taking care of the newborn. Give that 5-year-old extra attention, extra time. Do some fun things that'll really help. And number 3, don't force the relationship. Those are the 3. And now I want to move on to Rachel. All right, so our second question comes from Rachel. She says, hello, this is Rachel. I have a toddler, Mel, who's 2 years old, who recently welcomed a new baby, Lucy, into the family. Mel has been displaying physical aggression toward her little sister, like hitting and pushing whenever she feels like she's not getting enough attention. Good identification, Rachel. I'm concerned for the safety of both children. Can you provide guidance on how to mitigate physical aggression from a toddler towards the new baby and help them develop a more positive sibling relationship? Yes, absolutely, Rachel. I really like that you've identified, I kind of interrupted your question there to say, I really like how you have identified that this is probably around attention, right? That's usually where the place for a toddler to have aggression towards a newborn comes from. It is a feeling of, hey, here I am. I still need mom. I still need dad, especially when there's only one caregiver in the room, right? I still need mom. And here's this baby who's taking away mom's attention and time. And so I think two things that you can really do beyond. I'll just reiterate the advice that I give to Parker, which I'm not saying that you did this, Rachel, but if you did, stop doing this, which is trying to force the relationship. So don't try and force Mel into interacting with Lucy in some positive way. At this point, that's not going to be effective right now. Eventually, we'll get to that for sure. I don't want siblings to just coexist. I want them to be friends. I think ideally, that's the model. You want your kids to be lifelong friends, right? And there's a lot that we can do, especially in childhood. But in toddler years, it's not super essential that you build and do all of this work, right? So Rome, the saying is Rome wasn't built in a day. Relationships are not built in a day either. Your relationship between Lucy and Mel is going to develop over time. So that's number one, right? So I guess it's three things. I'm giving everybody three things today. I hope I can give three things to the next one. So number two is, as much as you can, we want to redirect the physical aggression and, in tandem with making sure that we keep Lucy safe as much as possible. So if we see the physical aggression beginning, we want to try and redirect that and just say things, use language related to, telling Mel how we would prefer that Mel behaves, rather than demonizing her physical aggression on its own terms, right? So if Mel is like pulling back her fist like she's going to hit Lucy, then you say, we engaged Lucy, or we touched Lucy with gentle hands. And I know that sounds like so Instagram and so cringy, but it really does work with kids to tell them what you would like to see rather than what they are doing is wrong. So just constantly redirecting. We engage Lucy with gentle hands. We touch with gentle hands. This is the kind of communication that tends to work with 2-year-olds. What people like to do with 2-year-olds, which doesn't tend to work very well, is they try and bring in empathy, right? So they try and say, you wouldn't like it if somebody hit you. And a 2-year-old doesn't really usually possess the capacity to actually do that type of perspective taking. So it's much better to just say, we use gentle hands. And then if she's going to pull back and hit her anyway, or she goes to push her anyway, just stand up with Lucy, pick her up, make sure that you have enough support to do this, right? And I know that there is going to be times when, we'll get to that in a second, but there is going to be times when there's just going to be conflict and there's going to be hitting and fighting. My 3-year-old right now, we were really sure that we were out of the biting phase with my 2-year-old. And then yesterday, in a really, really blown up conflict that I could have maybe intervened sooner on, I can kind of blame myself for that to an extent. My 2-year-old bit my 3-year-old, and we have been so long since he's bitten anybody that we weren't even anticipating it, and he actually got him in the face. So my 2-year-old's totally fine today, but in the moment afterwards, you're like, oh my God, I let my kid get bit in the face by his brother, right? So like that's going to happen. That's going to keep happening. You have to give yourself a little bit of not a little bit. You're going to have to give yourself a ton of grace and forgiveness with siblings. They're going to hurt each other. Lucy's going to hurt Mel. Mel's going to hurt Lucy. Toys are going to go flying across the room. Sometimes the pain is going to be totally inadvertent. We're playing in this rough way. Fighting happens. It's not great. We obviously try and redirect it. We try and come up with better conflict mediation. We process it afterwards, but fighting happens in families. Kids hurt each other. That just happens. We just prevent the really, really bad as much as humanly possible. We prevent the really, really bad things, right? And so we make sure that, Mel does not, if Mel is carrying something heavy around, now we're going to be much more conscious of what's going on. So if and when she does attempt to hurt Lucy again, just pick Lucy up and say, I'm sorry, we have to move Lucy away. We have to be gentle with Lucy. So just tell her what you're doing and explain that, not to shame or punish, but just to say we need to, be constantly redirecting what we're looking for out of the relationship, what we're looking for out of Mel. And then I had a third one, but I'm forgetting now what it is. Man, I should take more notes. Okay, I'm going to leave that one where it is for now. And if I think of it, I'll come back to it. Seem reasonable to everybody? Not that you can respond because this is pre-recorded, but I'm going to assume that you're all nodding along. Okay. And if you did physically nod right there, good on you for feeling like we're really in this together, because that's how I feel. When I record these, I imagine that I'm literally talking to you, Parker, to you, Rachel, and then now to Katie. But before I get to Katie's question, I want to say one quick call out, which is that, but before I get to Katie's question, I want to give one quick kind of mini advertisement here, which is just to say that if you are not yet on the email list for this podcast, but just in general for the Whole Parent platform, you need to be on that. I am announcing something literally this Thursday. So in 2 days from now, I am announcing something on that email list that you want to be on. It's an awesome opportunity that we have. So get on that email list right now. You can do so in the link, which is in the show notes below. Just head over to my Stand store. You can just click right there. It'll give you a little box to put in your email, and you'll be all set. If you're already on my email list, great. You already know the amazing content that we send out every single week. So on Thursday, we send out an email. A lot of times it will be related to the podcast. That's what we've been trying to do for this first part of the year as we've been putting these podcasts out. So it might be like an auxiliary thing or like additional tips or something like that, something supplemental. Also, it just reminds you to listen to the podcast. And then I also just tell stories in there. I give tips. I give tricks. I will share anything that's happening with Whole Parent outside, whether I'm doing like a Q&A or a live workshop or something like that, or a live training. That's where you can find out about all that stuff. And I have an upcoming book. And so if you are interested in that and learning more about that and how you can be the first person to have that in your hands, that's the place to be. The email list, which again is linked in the show notes. It's in my Stand store. Join that email list, open the emails, make sure that you add me to your contacts, wherever, so you're actually getting those. It's some of the best stuff that I put out, and it's completely free. Okay. Last question is from Katie. Katie says, I recently gave birth to a new baby, Colin, and I have an older child, Elijah, who's 4 years old. I'm feeling overwhelmed and guilty because I can't seem to give Elijah the attention that he needs and wants. Oh my gosh, I remembered what I was supposed to say to Rachel about Lucy and Mel. Stay tuned. This is what it is. Okay. I'm feeling overwhelmed because I'm guilty that I can't seem to give Elijah the full attention that he needs and wants. I'm constantly exhausted, and I have my hands full with Elijah's baby care. How can I manage these feelings of guilt and ensure that Elijah doesn't feel neglected during this challenging time of adjusting to life with a new baby? Here is the advice that I was supposed to give to Rachel, and I'm going to give it to Katie, and I'm going to give it to Rachel at the same time. And that is that your child, in order to adequately give attention, I kind of referenced this a little bit with Parker at the beginning where I said, have that special one-on-one time to balance out the both sides of the equation. When you bring home a new baby, there is going to be less attention for the older child. So just kind of show up and show out when you can. I'm going to go one step further here and say there is absolutely going to be times when you are going to where your child is going to feel, in comparison, a little bit neglected. They're going to feel like, man, this new baby came around, and now what do I do? And I have two big tips. The first one goes for both Rachel and Katie, and that is that giving your older children, especially, whether it's 4 or 2, or even in Parker's case, 5, giving them targeted attention for shorter periods of time where you're able to give them 100% of your attention rather than giving them, some, okay, yeah, I'll be over there in a second type attention, some, half attention, divided attention for all the time is much better. So it is better to tell Elijah and even Mel, right, who's 2 years old, hey, I need to take care of your little sibling right now. In one case, it's a little girl, a little boy. I need to take care of your little brother, your little sister right now. But when I'm able to, I want to fully engage with what you're saying. I want to see what it is that you're doing. This is so transformative because actually most of us don't give our children as much or as full of our attention as past generations. So we have these amazing little light boxes in our pockets that can do all sorts of fun things. They're called cell phones, and they take up a lot of our attention. And oftentimes, in the blurring of work-life boundaries where you're on your phone, whether that's for work stuff or you're texting or you're watching one of my videos on social media and your kid comes up to you, it's really natural to want to give them about half of your attention. Just go, okay, yeah, whatever you say. Or when you're cooking or when you're doing chores, or yes, when you're taking care of a little sibling, it can feel natural to want to give them half your attention. I'm not saying that you can't do that. I'm saying that the way that kids feel connected and like they're getting the attention and what's the word? Attachment, their attachment needs met, is by intentional, targeted attention. That is, what Eliza Pressman in her book, 5 Principles of Parenting, which just came out, calls delight time. And so basically what we can do is we can say, hey, I'm going to set aside 5 minutes a day to play. And literally it could be 5 minutes. I'm going to give you kind of a cheat code for how we can do this in 9 minutes, super, super effectively in a second, but just 5 minutes a day, or even just a couple 5-minute spurts, but lock that down and say, for these next 5 minutes, I'm not going to do anything other than play imaginatively with my kids. And so imaginative play can look like a whole host of things. It doesn't have to be playing pretend. It can look like playing with little figures. It can look like dress up. It can look like playing kitchen. It can look like playing restaurant. But the two keys here, number one, they have your full and complete attention, right? You're responding to them. If they're doing something, like if they're showing you something, react to that. Don't just like blow them off. So number one, put your phone away. Just take that and just say, put that away. Stop listening to the podcast of me or whatever. Put that away. Give them your full and complete attention. That's number one, for a set period of time, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. And then number two, allow them to be the leader. So whatever they're playing, whatever they're trying to show you, just go with it. Oh, I whacked my microphone there. Just go with it. So don't try and fix it. Don't try and make the story work. It's really hard for many of us who get into the play and then we try and take over and lead and drive a little bit. The play may not work, but just let them feel like they're guiding you through it. This can be such an amazing kind of attachment thing. It can be kind of a cup filler, right? So there's 2 ways to fill a cup with a child for their attention needs. There's the way where you just kind of splash water in over and over throughout the day. And as time goes on, as they're getting hurt or whatever, some of that gets drained out and you just, always splashing a little bit of water. There's another way, which is way more effective. It's just you put the cup under the tap, you open it all the way up for a much shorter period of time. Your kids would much rather have all of your attention some of the time than some of your attention all the time. So just do that. Give them that targeted attention. And then, the other piece of this, beyond that target attention, and this is going to be more effective for Elijah, and then I'll go all the way back to Parker with a 5-year-old, and maybe this would be helpful for Rachel and Mel as well, is that as the baby takes up space, we want to allow for your child to express however they feel about that fully. And before I get to this, man, see, I'm all over the place today. I forgot about the 9 minutes. Okay, so there's also some research from Jacques Pankstaff. So maybe I'll cut that part out. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just let you guys hear me ramble around. But okay, so there's also some research from Jacques Pankstaff, who is a psychologist or a behavioral neuroscientist, not a psychologist, a behavioral neuroscientist, who came up with this idea or this hypothesis that he then later proved, that if you give children targeted attention at very specific times throughout the day, that they feel that those times in the day can kind of be supercharged attention. So you can give them 3 minutes of attention at these 3 different times in the day, so 9 minutes total. And those 3 minutes of attention at each of those times feels to the child more like 15 or 30 minutes of attention. And those 3 times are, number one, right when they wake up. So if as much as you can, give your child your full and undivided and complete attention to snuggle, cuddle, whatever, right when they wake up. Right before they go to bed, so whatever your bedtime routine is, make sure that for that older child, your bedtime routine for them is just for them. So you're not going off and doing this with the baby. Figure out a way where that works, right? As much as you can. I know it's sometimes impossible, but as much as you can, give your child at least, 3 to 5 minutes at the end of the night where you are 100% theirs. And then either when they wake up from nap or when they come home from an activity or school. So when they reunite, when they reconnect. Those 3 times, before they go to bed, after they wake up in the morning, and after they either wake up from a nap or reconnect with you throughout the day, or during the day, those are supercharged attention times where that attention is kind of it's exponentially, it's received exponentially more. And so that is the basis of attachment, that actually parents, working parents, this is good news for especially parents who were away from their children much more than they wanted to be, could give their children that 9 minutes and it would totally change the dynamic for their children. So that's really, really good advice. But I want to get to this last piece here because we're running short on time. And that last piece is, what do we do when our child comes to us and has negative feelings about their sibling, right? So whether that's Mel, whether that's Parker with his child, whether that's Katie with Elijah. When your child brings to you negative feelings about their sibling, as much as you can, your goal as a parent should just be to receive, listen, and say, wow, that is so hard, and validate, not to redirect. And it's really, really hard for us as parents because now you have a person, even if it's your own child, saying something hurtful or negative about one of your other children. And so it can feel natural to feel defensive, right? Hormonally, we're charged to feel defensive when somebody says, well, I don't like my little sibling and I want them to die, or I want them to go away, or I just don't want to see them anymore. That can feel so intimidating to us. And just because that feels intimidating or that feels exhausting, don't fall into the trap of then kind of turning on the older sibling who's just expressed something, a really, really big feeling to you, and biting their head off about it. And if you've done this before, it's okay. We can repair. We can do better in the future. It's okay. But it's really natural. I've done it for sure. But as much as we can, we want to try to not know their feelings. So when they say, I really don't like my brother anymore, so if this is Elijah, I wish that you would just give Colin back. There's never enough time for me. I wish he would just go away forever and we would never see him again. Instead of saying, no, he's your brother, you shouldn't feel that way about him, or don't say things like that about your brother, that's not nice, or that's not kind, or you don't really mean that. Instead, just say, wow, those are really big feelings, bud. I'm hearing you. That must be so hard to feel like you're not being given as much time since Colin came around. That must be so hard to feel that way. I know those are big words, those are big feelings. And by yesing those feelings, we actually give them their permission to feel, well, they do feel seen and heard and valued and understood and validated. And then they have the permission to then turn and go, you know what, actually, they're not so bad. And if you think that that's only for young kids, when I tell you that one of the best books about siblings that's ever been written, called Siblings Without Rivalry, is where I learned about this principle. And that in that book, Siblings Without Rivalry, she's talking about like a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old who are saying this. Yesing the feelings and never changes. I'm going to talk about this in the siblings episode when that eventually comes along. So just understand that never changes, but as much as you can, say yes to those feelings. And the result of that, combined with everything else we've talked about today, is going to make welcoming a new baby into your home and into your family so much smoother. Is it going to be perfect? No. Or is it going to be rough? Absolutely. You're going to have to embrace the suck. That's what we started the whole episode with. It is not going to go the way you think it's going to go. It is going to be hard. However, if you do this stuff, the result is going to be much smoother, and in the long term, connected children, not only to you, but to one another. And that is our ultimate goal. All right, that's it. That's all we have for you today on the Whole Parent Podcast. I just wanted to let you know one more time, if you are listening to this, to go ahead and share this with somebody else. I almost said like and subscribe. Yes, if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're anywhere else, make sure you rate the podcast or send a review. And yes, if you have somebody in your family who or friends or who goes to the same faith community as you or same school as your kids, and they're welcoming a new baby soon, send them this podcast. Just go ahead and send it to them. I know it might feel like unsolicited advice, but just say, hey, this is a guy I follow. I think that he has really amazing things. I know you're welcoming a new baby soon. Maybe this will be helpful to you. That, among all other things that we've talked about today, that is one of the best ways that you can spread this message to the world. And I truly believe if we continue to spread this message, we can change the world through parenting. So go ahead and share this with somebody you know who's expecting a baby, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.